you mean what you just sang? Do you want to be more holy in your heart? Do you want to be more like Jesus in your heart? Interesting how the hymn says that. Not just to be more holy, not just to be a Christian, in your heart. And of course, in church, when we talk about the heart, we don't mean that organ that's pumping blood in your chest. We mean that center, that emotional center of your being. The heart. And the heart is so important because it is the emotional center. And along with our mind and our spirit, these are all the things that ideally we want to give to God when we talk about wanting to be surrendered to God and living for God and knowing God. The heart is also the center where emotions and feelings come and go. And sometimes feelings are positive and sometimes they can be negative. You saw in that clip the man talking about being jealous and how it kind of stored up inside of him until it kind of spilled over. There's a phenomenon today that is taking place that a lot of people don't realize. If you use social media, Facebook, Instagram, it's affecting people's lives in this way. A study just came out from the University of Michigan, actually it was last year, where they studied people on social media. And what they are finding is that the more time that people spend on social media, the more unhappy they are with their lives. Now, why do you think that would be? You're allowed to speak. Comparing themselves to others, right? Because that's what you learn about on Facebook. You step into other people's lives, right? And Instagram, you see pictures of stuff. And yeah, people are going through this thing where they're saying, your vacation was more exotic than mine. You went to the islands? Wow, I went to Maryland. Yeah. And, oh, your son graduated first in his class? My son dropped out, you might say. There's this comparing. Your grandkids are better looking than my grandkids. Oh, yeah, so we don't feel as good about ourselves. And social media allows us to do all this comparing on a daily basis. Now, jealousy and envy have been around a long time. History tells us that way back, centuries ago, Michelangelo and the great painter Raphael were commissioned to do some artwork at the Vatican. And Michelangelo was commissioned to do a sculpture, and Raphael was to paint some paintings. And so they were working kind of together at the Vatican, and they were so jealous of each other that they reached the point where they would not speak to each other by the time they got done. And the funny thing was they were doing what they were doing for the glory of God. But those emotions kind of got in the way and prevented them from really experiencing maybe the fullness of God's blessing while they were doing that work. And envy and jealousy go way back further than that, back to Bible times, to this story in 1 Samuel chapter 18, a story about the king of Israel. His name was Saul, and how jealous he was of David. Now, David, at this point in the Bible, has just killed Goliath, the giant. And Saul was happy about that at first because, if you remember the story, nobody from the Israelite army wanted to face Goliath because he was huge. And Goliath was coming out each day. He was taunting the Israelite army, saying, "Send me your best soldier and we'll go at it." And it was David, the shepherd boy, young man, who stepped forward, and with his sling, he slayed the giant. So Saul was happy about that because it made him look good that his army was able to produce somebody who was able to fight Goliath and win. So in the beginning it was great, but then something happens. In chapter 18, beginning at verse 6, it says, "When the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul. with singing and dancing, with joyful songs and with tambourines and lutes. As they danced, they sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. So all of these women come out to greet Saul because he's the king, the mighty leader. And they've got tambourines and they're dancing around and they're singing and they're celebrating Saul. And then there's David. This is not his parade, Saul is thinking. It's my parade. I'm the king. And when the women are singing, they're singing, yeah, Saul has slain thousands, and David tens of thousands. And right away, Saul begins to feel threatened, and he becomes fearful. He's jealous, and he's envious of David and the attention that he's getting from the crowd. Kind of reminds me of athletes today. You know, when you hear about a baseball player signing a $50 million contract, and you think, wow, what I could do with $50 million. And then you hear later that that same player who got $50 million is upset because a player on another team who plays the same position signed a contract for $60 million. And the $50 million player feels insulted that he's only getting $50 million. And people like you and me, we say, we'll be okay with $50 million. I'd be all right with that. I wouldn't complain. But in their minds, there's that rivalry, there's that jealousy or that envy. I play the same position, you're getting more money than me, that's not right. Then they might not show up for spring training because they feel like, I've been insulted. There's that envy and jealousy at work in people's lives. It's kind of what's happening with Saul. Yeah, David's great, he killed Goliath, but I'm still the king, he wants to say. Verse 8 continues, Saul was very angry. This refrain galled him. Do you love that expression? It galled him. What does that mean? I didn't look that up, but I think of like your gallbladder. You know, it's like a visceral reaction that he has to this. It's like it's in his gut, you know, just the center of his being. He just can't stand the fact that David is getting this attention. He was angry and he was galled. They have credited David with tens of thousands, Saul thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. So right there, the relationship changed. Saul went from feeling great about David, kind of bailed us out. You know, he stepped forward and fought the giant and defeated him. But now it's like, wait a minute. Now that he's done this, he's captured the hearts of the people, and they like him better than me. Verse 10, the next day an evil spirit from God came forcefully upon Saul. He was prophesying in his house while David was playing the harp, as he usually did. Saul had a spear in his hand, and he hurled it, saying to himself, I'll pin David to the wall. But David eluded him twice. David evidently was not only a good warrior, but he was pretty light on his feet. The Bible tells us that David often played the harp, or the lyre it was called, to kind of soothe Saul's disruptive spirit. And when Saul sees him, he sees his chance to kill David and actually throws a spear at him, but he misses. Verse 12, Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David, but had left Saul. So he sent David away from him and gave him command over 1,000 men. And David led the troops in their campaigns. In everything that David did, he had great success because the Lord was with him. When Saul saw how successful David was, he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he led them in their campaigns. So Saul's got all these emotions raging within him. It says he's angry in verse 8. It says he's afraid in verse 12 and 15. And we can see clearly that he was jealous and he was envious. Envy and jealousy are kind of like sisters. They tend to go hand in hand. And now it's turned him into a person who wants to commit murder. He's trying to kill David. Jealousy and envy can take us that far. You know, when a person's murdered, a lot of times police detectives, the first place they look is those persons close to the person that was murdered. And a lot of times it's the spouse they look at closely. because there are times when there's infidelity involved, and that brings out a rage of envy and jealousy and can lead to one partner killing the other. It's a strong emotion. I think the key in what was happening here in the story as to why Saul became this way, the key is found in verse 12, where it says that Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David but had left Saul. He was afraid of David because David now had what Saul lost. Saul was anointed as the first king of Israel, and the Lord was with him, but Saul disobeyed God. Saul, at one point, we looked at this a few weeks ago in that chapter where it told about how Saul had disobeyed God. He was told to wipe out the Amalekites, and Saul didn't do that. He wiped out most of them, but he spared the king and a lot of their animals, and God was not happy. In fact, there's one verse in which it says that God regretted making Saul the king. And so he had a fall from grace, Saul did. And David is the next up-and-coming person. He's going to be the next king. And Saul is realizing now that David's success is putting a spotlight on Saul's failure. And what this says to me is that jealousy and envy can be a symptom of something that's going on inside of us, a symptom that we need to pay attention to if we're feeling some strong feelings of jealousy and envy. Now, I'm not talking about low-level jealousy. You know, like I've heard two women talking, and maybe one of them has been my wife, I don't know. But someone will come up to my wife and say, "Oh, I'm so jealous. I love those shoes that you're wearing." Well, the person, I mean, they're not really going to like try to steal them off my wife's feet, I don't think. But that's a low-level jealousy. That's a way of complimenting a person, right? "Oh, I'm jealous, you know, of the way you look," or something like that. Where it gets out of control is where that feeling just tends to grow and grow. And in the video, Adam Sandler talked about it being like this green thing inside of him that just wants to come out. And they talk about the green monster, envy and jealousy, which is what it is. And it can be like a cancer that grows in us to the point that it changes who we are and changes the trajectory of our life. Because what's happening when we're wrapped up in jealousy and envy is that we stop looking above and we start looking around. We're looking at what other people have, and we're comparing ourselves to other people. And we stop looking up so much, meaning looking to God, and remembering that the Bible says that we're fearfully and wonderfully made, all of us individually. We're gifted, we're blessed, we have so much. And yes, somebody else may have something that you don't have and that you want. But can you pray yourself to a point where you can celebrate with that person who just received a blessing? Because sometimes that's what it takes to overcome your jealousy or your envy, is to get on your knees and say, "You know what? My neighbor just got a brand new car. Good for them. And I'm going to pray for them and pray that that car will be good for them and their family and that they're going to be safe in that car. And that it'll be a good thing for them," instead of saying, "Rah, rah, 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 rah. I need to go get a new car and compete with my neighbor." Jealousy and envy are a symptom or a sign of something that's not quite right inside of us. And we need to pay attention to that and offer it up to God so that it doesn't grow and take over. A story out of Bulgaria's history says that there were two wrestlers years ago who were very good wrestlers, and they were in the same weight class, so they often competed against each other from the time they were very young. The one wrestler was just a little bit better than the other wrestler, and so the one wrestler always won whenever they faced off in a championship match. And this went on for years, through school and beyond. When there were championships in the area for wrestling, the two would end up meeting each other in the finals. And the one wrestler would always win. And the one that always lost, as you can imagine, was so frustrated and so jealous. He wanted just once to be able to beat the other guy, but he was never able to do that. Well, time went by, and the wrestler that always won was tragically killed. And the community grieved their loss and decided to make a statue of him and put it in the town square. And so there was this big, beautiful statue of the wrestler that was so successful. And that was just like the last straw for the wrestler that always lost. Even now that that wrestler was dead, it was still tormenting the wrestler that always lost. And so late at night, when no one was around, the wrestler that always lost would go into the town square, and he would climb up on the statue, and he would try to yank it down because he was so mad and so jealous. And he did this many times. And one night, during the night, no one was around. He climbed up on the statue, put his arm around the neck of the wrestler in the statue, and he's pulling and he's yanking, and his jealousy and his envy and his anger was unusually strong that night, and he pulled the statue out from its foundation, and the statue fell over and landed on that man and crushed him to death. A sad and crazy story, but maybe a lesson for all of us as to where jealousy and envy and anger and fear and all the things that come in that package, where all that can lead us if we let it go. I heard about a pastor in a community where there were two large churches and then this smaller church where this pastor was, because you know pastors get jealous too. I read about that somewhere. So there's two large churches and one smaller church, and this pastor was so jealous of the two large church pastors. You know, they have a big church, big parking lot. And he wrestled with that. And then until finally he went to God in prayer and he said, Lord, I just don't like feeling this way. Please take this away from me. And what he sensed God was telling him to do was to pray for those two churches. Pray for their success. And he did. He began praying. And the churches began to grow more. And the churches grew and got even bigger to the point that those two big churches couldn't hold all the people that were coming. And the spillover came to his church. And his church was no longer a little church because he was getting all of those people. So if your neighbor gets an in-ground pool, can you celebrate with them? Can you say, God bless you? Can I come swimming? No. Can you say, all success to you, that you have the resources and the wherewithal to be able to afford to have a new pool? That's wonderful. And pray for them. Because I think that's one of the ways that we come against envy and jealousy. It's one of the ways we just offer it up to God and say, Lord, I don't want to feel this way. But we have to be honest about the feelings that we're feeling. God already knows. Sometimes we think we keep things secret from God. He already knows you and I are feeling that way. Offer it up to God and say, Lord, I don't want this in my life. It's like a cancer. I offer it up to you. Bring me to a place where I can pray for that person that I envy so that I can let this go and so that my spirit can be lifted as I just remove this from my life. Lord, these are powerful feelings, and sometimes we don't know what to do with them. Remind us that when we come to you with them, that you'll take it away, that if we faithfully seek you on this, that you will just clear that out of our heart, and that you'll bring a new spirit in our heart, a spirit that is open and loving, and that will enable us to be, just as we sang in the song, more holy, more like Jesus. We ask all this in his name. Amen.